My name is Henri Reuchlin, and I'm very proud and happy to present today you a story about Trappist beers. I've been advisor to the Trappist breweries, two Trappist breweries for the past 16 years. Currently, I'm also the director of the Stibon Beer Education, and I'm a former chairman of the European Beer Consumers Union. I would have loved to be with you in person today, but due to personal reasons, I cannot be there. So I will tell you my story through this means. And if you have any questions, then send me an email. Okay, let's see if I can start my presentation. And I will do that here. That looks so. Um, Trappist beers, they're often celebrated as the champagne of beers, the most revered beers. And the question is, why? And to answer that question, we maybe have to answer some questions first. And the first is, what is a Trappist beer? And that's a question that is maybe difficult to answer, but the first step is it's some kind of an abbey beer. And then that leads to the next question. What's an abbey beer? That answer is very simple. It's a beer referring to an abbey. But then, what is an abbey? And that's where my story starts. What is an abbey? This is an abbey. This is Mount St. Bernard Abbey, an example of an abbey. This one is in England, and this is where Tint Meadow Trappist Ale is brewed. An abbey is a monastery, and a monastery is a complex of buildings, including living and working quarters, and a place of worship. A monastery is a home of religious people, usually monks, nuns, monastics, could be other people. And something to keep in mind, a monastery is part of different religions. So you have the Roman Catholics, you have Buddhism, Hindu, Orthodox, you have all kinds of monasteries. But an abbey specifically refers to a Roman Catholic monastery. And it must be a monastery of a certain size, because if it has that size, it's independent, and then the head will be called an abbot. If it's a monk's monastery, or an abbess if they're nuns. Well, if that's an abbey, then abbey beer is a beer referring to monastery. And there's a lot of freedom in this, because it could be referring to an existing and living monastery. That makes the most sense. But it could also be one that's ruined or even destroyed, so a former abbey. And it could even be an imaginary monastery. And that says something, because that means that an abbey beer doesn't have to be brewed within a monastery. It could be, but it doesn't have to be. Even stronger than that, there is no rule to what's an abbey beer. So if SAB would like to call their black label beer an abbey beer tomorrow, they could, because there's no rule. It's only in Belgium you have a rule that if you want to be approved abbey beer, then you have to name your beer after a existing monastery or a former monastery, and you also have to pay part of the proceeds to that organization. But other than that, it's just free for all. So abbey beer is, well, it's strange, actually, isn't it? This is, by the way, one of the ruins of a monastery in Belgium, the Orval Monastery. They built a new one next to it, and that's where they brew the Orval Trappist beer. And to take you a little bit back, I have to take you back to the year 500. And in the year 500, there was a saint called Benedict, Saint Benedict, and he founded what's called the Mother Order of Monastic Life in Europe. He did that in Italy, and he did that in the land in the mountainous area, in an area that was very secluded, so people could live according to his rule. And his rule has a few aspects to it. And one is prayer, and prayer on fixed times. And they would pray 5 times a day. The first time at maybe 4:30 a.m. in the morning, the last time at 8 o'clock, and then in between as well. The second is the reading of the scripture, which makes sense for religious people. The third would be meditation. a moment of silence, because Benedictines live a life of regularity, of peace, of silence. We'll come back to that a little bit later. But, and this is for us as brewers the most interesting, also manual labor is part of monastic life of the Benedictines. They have to earn their own living. They have to learn to work with their hands, because if you're only in your head, you might get crazy maybe. And of course, they're living in a community because they're living in a monastery. And this is summed up by well, in a very simple way as ora et labora, pray at work. And that's where Saint Benedict and the Benedictines are known for. The idea is that praying and work is on an equal footing. It's both very important. It is that God is glorified not only in praying in the church, not only in reading the scripture, but also in your work. So that means that you do your work with the utmost attention. And that maybe is the key to why Trappist beers are so special. Okay, talking about Trappist. I told you already about the Benedictines who were living a life in seclusion, praying and working, and basically they couldn't own anything. But of course, if you work very hard and you pray very hard, you make money. And they made money and they got a little bit richer and life became a little bit more easy and a little bit more relaxed, and they wouldn't maybe eat as sober as they were used to. So what happened? I mean, monks are just like normal human beings. They got a little bit slack in the rule of Saint Benedict. So around the year 1100, there was like a revolt. And there was a group of monks that said, okay, we want to go back to the original rules. We want to go back to the strict rules of praying and living a simple life, a very sober. And they started a new monastery in a town called Citeaux in France. And because of this town, they were called Cistercians. Ora et labora, pray and work. But again, Cistercians are also just like people. So they got richer and life got a little bit more easy. And maybe they would sleep out on a Wednesday or something. So life again kind of evolved away from the strict rule of Saint Benedict. And that again, 500 years later, led to again a split. And that led to the Cistercians of the strict observance. Try to say that after you've been drinking 5 beers or you have a stutter. Cistercians of the strict observance. It's difficult. But there is something beautiful about it. Their monastery was founded in a town called La Trappe in Normandy. And that's why we call them Trappist. Okay, so the Trappists live a life of humility, of asceticism, very sober, very simple. They're not allowed to own anything, and they live a life of silence. So they will talk as little as possible. Until 1965, they were not allowed to talk at all, unless the abbot said you're allowed to talk. Now they will talk, but they're still, if they don't have to talk, they rather have the silence. And after 8 o'clock, the last hour of prayer, then there's the great silence. They're not allowed to talk at all, which is a beautiful way of life. Very simple, very sober, very strict. But that also leads to a weird paradox, because they produced one of the most revered beers around. And that's something I still haven't grasped myself after 16 years. So if you don't understand, don't mind. Maybe it is something that is not understandable, which would be beautiful as well. So here you see one of the monks working on the bottles of beer, in fact, putting the best before dates on it. So this is an idea of monastic working. So back to my question, what is Trappist beer? It's a monastic beer. That's clear, I guess. It is brewed or in the direct proximity of a Trappist monastery. So in difference from an abbey beer, which can be brewed anywhere, a Trappist beer really has to be brewed inside the monastery, a Trappist monastery, or really in the buildings attached to it. It also has to be brewed by or under supervision of the monks. So either the monks work themselves or they're the boss. So the CEO will always be one of the monks. They will make the decisions, they will set the goals, they will set the campaigns, everything will be supervised and by the monks. And of course, these monks live according to the rule of Saint Benedict, that God may be glorified in all things. So everything has to be perfect. Everything can be simple, but it has to be good. And the third thing is it's non-commercial. So the profits they make, they go to their own living. They need food. They need upkeep of the buildings. If they brew a little bit more, it will go to good causes because the monks don't own anything. And that usually leads to a low production because you can just say, okay, we have 10 monks living here. Those 10 monks need so much food. We need to repair the roof of the church. So we need a certain amount of beer. And we will brew that, but we will not brew one drop more. So if somebody would come there and say, well, I have this chain of supermarkets and could you please give me 100,000 barrels extra and I will pay you for it. I will pay you good for it. The monks will still say no, because in their head, they brew to live and they don't live to brew. So once they've brewed enough, they will stop brewing. And that together with their focus on quality, that will lead to a limited production. And of course, law of economics, if it's limited, if it's hard to get, the price is usually a little bit higher and it's more sought after. It's not a gimmick of the monks, it's just a result of the way they're thinking. And to give you an idea of their quest for perfection, if you want, it is one of the other points in the rule of Saint Benedict, and that is all utensils and property of the monastery should be considered as consecrated elements. So in Zundert, for instance, the brewery is now 16 years old, and if you would enter there, it would be like it's just built 1 month ago. It's squeaky clean. Everything is paid attention to. Everything is clean. And that's, I think, part of the secret of Trappist beers. This unwavering quest for quality, for simpleness, but correctness. And this is the brewery in Zundert, as you can see, a few years ago. Well, it is a brewery. I mean, they make beer, so that's usually not something very special. It's the people working there, it's the belief that's around there that makes Trappist beer so special. Okay, so Trappist beer is an abbey beer, as we discussed. It's brewed within the walls of the monastery. It's brewed under supervision of the monks, and it's non-commercial. And of course, it's of high quality, as I explained. And if you meet all these standards, then you get approval of the International Trappist Association. And that's something special because then you get a logo. You're awarded a logo, and it looks like that. And then you know you really have a true, authentic Trappist product. By the way, this is not only true for beer, but it's also true for bread, for chocolate, for honey. I think even for coffins. But that's beside the point. Okay, there are a few approved Trappist breweries, and they're not very many. There are in the world maybe 106 Trappist monasteries, and only about 9 are brewing. And out of the 106, there are about 7, I believe, in Africa, none in South Africa. So in South African Trappist beer, unfortunately, that won't be there. Most of the monasteries that are brewing are in Belgium. Westmalle is the first. That's where they started. Then West-Vleteren, Chimay, all in Belgium. Koningshoeve, La Trappe, that's in the Netherlands. Rochefort, Orval, also in Belgium. Trefontane in Italy. Zundert in the Netherlands. And Mount St. Bernard in the UK. These are the monasteries that are brewing beer at the moment. Other question maybe, is Trappist a style of beer? And the answer is no, it's not. It's a provenance, it's protected by law. There's a trademark trademark when you can call beer a Trappist beer, and that's when you meet the rules as said before. And there are traditional Trappist styles, which are usually in the Belgian way of brewing. So that's with the Belgian Abbey yeast, which will give it a lot of esters, fruity esters, yellow fruit, peaches, apricots, mango maybe. That's in blonde beers. If they're dark beers, that will be more cherry, maybe red berry, stuff like that. And the traditional styles of a Trappist would be an enkel, or also called a blonde or an extra. That's the simple beer. That's the everyday beer. It's often blonde, 4 to 6% ABV. Then you have the double. That's a darker beer. It usually will have 6 to 8% ABV. The idea was when people couldn't read and write, the simple beer would have 1x on the cask, and the more expensive beer would have 2x's on the cask. Then the even more heavier beer would be the triple. That would be often blonde, again 8 to 10% ABV, and the heaviest beers are quadruples, often amber color, 9 to 12% ABV. You see, I write down in two languages, Dutch and French, and that's also referring to Belgium because that's a bilingual or even a trilingual country. But one is the Dutch and the other way is the French way of spelling it. So these are the traditional Trappist beers that you would see, and we will try a triple a little bit later. Especially the heavier, darker beers, so the quadruple, they lend themselves also for keeping. And here you see a cellar at Chimay, one of the Trappist monasteries, where they are keeping the Chimay Bleu. That's a quadruple, often barrel aged. And that beer will keep for 5 years, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years. A while ago, I tasted a Trappist beer from Chimay that was 50 years old, and it was still okay. But that's a little bit hit and miss. But 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, when you keep your beer cool and dark, it's achievable. So instead of a wine cellar, I have a beer cellar, of course. Okay, then there's also non-traditional styles because the monks are allowed to brew anything they want. So there's bread beers made with Brettanomyces. There's wheat beers. There are bocks. There's even an alcohol-free Trappist made by La Trappe. There was even a lager made by Trappist monks. So Trappist beers is not a style of beer. It's a provenance. It is from these Trappist monasteries. And this is again Zundert, where Brother Christian is trying one of the beers. Okay, maybe it's good to taste. And we have for you today a triple from La Trappe, Koningshoeve from the Netherlands. And you see the tasting wheel here with some descriptors for the beer. If you can read it, it might be rather small. So I invite you to taste the Trappist triple from La Trappe. And now you know also where the name La Trappe comes from. And while you're tasting, I will tell you a little bit more about the beer. So triple, what kind of beer is it? It is a beer yellow to amber in color, EBC 10 to 25. The clarity will be almost brilliant to slightly hazy. If there are bottle conditions, they might be slightly hazy to very hazy. It depends on the way you pour your beer. And I will come back to that pouring of the beer a little bit later. The aroma flavor, the malt flavor and aroma is low. The hops are low to medium, usually from noble hops from Europe. A little bit floral, bitterness low to medium, and the yeast will give medium to high esters, as I explained before, because it's a Belgian style of yeast. There could be some phenolics in as well. And then the body would be low to medium, highly carbonated, well attenuated, and usually alcohol warming. So why is the body low to medium? If you make a beer that has 8 to 10% alcohol, that's because for a triple and for double as well, the brewers will use a part of will substitute a part of the malt by sugar. and the sugar is fermentable, so it will raise, of course, the alcohol content, but it will keep the beer easy drinking, and that's one of the key points of a triple. It should be easy drinking. Original gravity 16 to 23, attenuation 80 to 86%, and the alcohol, as I said, 7.5 to 10.5 by volume. By the way, this is a picture of the Westmalle Trappist brewery. You see the modern brew house in the front, the old brew house in the back. And Westmalle is where they basically invented the triple. It's the first Trappist abbey to brew a triple. And people think triple is a very old style, but it's not. It's only invented in the 1930s. So in between the First and the Second World War, when in Belgium it was not allowed to sell spirits anymore. So the brewers decided to make a heavier beer to have people still give people the chance to drink something heavier. Wine was too expensive, spirits was forbidden, so they could drink a heavy beer. And the monks are no strangers to commercial things, although even if they're Trappist, so they decided to make a triple. Enkel and double beers, so the lower ABV beers, they have a much longer history, but triple is not even a century old. By the way, in the Netherlands, it is one of the best sold specialty beers, even better than IPA, for instance. Here you see a picture, La Trappe Triple, the beer you're drinking. A few years ago, it was announced that it was the best beer in the Netherlands. And here you see a picture of the celebrations where one of the monks and one of the people at the brewery got the award for brewing the best beer in the Netherlands. So what you're drinking is, of course, a Trappist beer, must be of high standards. Then maybe the question how to serve a triple. I assume that it's hard to do it the proper way in the circumstances you are here now at the Intervarsity, but there are some rules to properly pour a triple or any beer with which is bottle conditioned with re-fermentation in the bottle. So one thing, the most important thing is don't rock the yeast in the bottom. You don't want to pour the yeast. You have to leave that alone. So let the beer settle before opening. That means that you keep it at a dark place standing for about 48 hours. The serving temperature would usually be the ABV. So if you have a beer of 8% alcohol, serve it at 8 to 10%, 8 to 10 degrees centigrade. If you have a beer of 12 ABV, serve it at 12 to 15 degrees centigrade. So these beers you are supposed to serve at a little bit higher temperatures. The idea is then that the esters and the phenolics and all the aroma develops better than when the beer is too cold. And of course, since they put so much effort in making a complex beer, you should also be able to perceive that. So that's why you drink these beers a little bit warmer than you would do a lager. Well, if you have the bottle, put it on a firm surface and then move the opener, not the bottle. So the bottle stays put, not to rock the yeast, and you only move the opener. Then in one easy movement, pour the beer in the right glass and also use a coaster. The right glass usually for Trappist beers will be a chalice. Which will allow the aroma to develop and to really envelop your nose, so you really can smell the beer. Well, pour gently in one go, again, not to disturb the yeast at the bottom. And of course, the label and the logo should always face the customer. And then, of course, you still have a little bit left in the bottle because you didn't pour out the yeast. And if you really want, you can swirl this yeast a little bit around and pour it in a little glass next to the normal beer glass. And then you would have a beer tasting of two beers, one without the yeast and one where you can explain people how yeast will taste. Okay, something about bottle conditioning. And that's the last of my talk. This is the conditioning room of the Westmalle brewery in Belgium. where their triple and their double will stay for several weeks undergoing re-fermentation in the bottle. If you want to do re-fermentation, first thing to do is to know your beer. What's the attenuation? How many left fermentable sugars are there? What's the CO2? What's the yeast count that's still alive? Because you're going to ferment in a bottle, in a closed container. So you have to calculate your pitch rate for sugar and for yeast, because during re-fermentation, you will develop CO2 and pressure. And you, of course, do not want exploding bottles. So you really have to know what's in your beer, how much pressure is going to be created by re-fermentation in the bottle. Of course, avoid oxygen as much as possible, and of course, avoid any infection. One thing to be very mindful of is dry hopping, because hops usually have some enzymes that can transfer non-fermentable sugars into fermentable sugar. So if you make your calculation, you say, okay, well, there's this much fermentable sugar, so I can add this amount of sugar and yeast. And then all of a sudden the hops start to create more fermentable sugars. And that makes it very difficult again and dangerous because of the high pressure inside the bottle. Usually you will use special bottle conditioning yeast. Most big brewers will, most Trappist brewers will as well. This bottle conditioning yeast has two properties. It will float to the bottom quite quickly, and it will stick to the bottom when you're pouring. So it's easier to pour the beer as clear as possible. The warm room, and that might be a surprise to you, will be 20 to 25 degrees. So that will be warm in our climate, maybe not so warm in your climate. And that's maybe also a reason why it's very hard to do bottle conditioning in Africa. And it will take about 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the beer, depending on the yeast, everything. And 20 to 25 degrees, the Orval Trappist Brewery, for instance, has their warm room, as they call it, at 17 degrees centigrade. So that's actually a cold room. And of course, always check your bottle pressure, because that's key. Otherwise, you will be creating bombs, and that's not what you want. So this is an example of the re-fermentation room at Tin Meadow, where there will be, from every lot, there will be at least one bottle with a pressure measurement on it, so to see and to follow development of re-fermentation. Okay, there are some positive reasons. Why would you do the re-fermentation in the bottle? And one is it reduces oxygen. The second, it retards staling, because it will absorb undesirable compounds. It will generate positive aromas, and it will generate also positive flavors. It will enhance the foam, and you will get a better head retention. And maybe one of the nicest things, and that's also why they started re-fermentation in a bottle, because it was the only way to get CO2 in your beer. Because usually there would be open fermenters, there would be no way to get CO2 inside your beer. And of course, by re-fermentation you can. And because it takes time, it's slow, it's a very fine kind of bubble, finer than when you are force carbonating your beer. It's a mousse, almost like a champagne. And then it creates a little ethanol. But most special re-fermentation yeast do not really produce a lot of ethanol. And of course, it will increase its resistance to infection, because you have an overdose of yeast. But if there are positives, there also are negatives, of course. You might have some hydrolysis of the yeast, because the yeast will die at a certain time. Bottle fermented beers you usually keep up to 3 years, so a lot longer than non-bottle bottle fermented beers. But still, that also comes with a negative. You might have some autolysis of your yeast. It's sensitive to the pitch rate and the sugar, the bottle pressure. I already talked about that. You might have some degeneration of proteins. It of course takes time and space, and you will get a yeast haze in your beer. But for me, it's a beauty. It adds to your beer, this yeast. It also adds to the taste, and it even provides some vitamin B. Okay, with this on re-fermentation in the bottle, I came to the end of my presentation. Normally I would take questions, but now you have to email me. I only want to thank you for your attention, and goodbye. Bye-bye.